For 35 years, the cool, dark water of Serenity Lake was my sanctuary. It wasn't just a body of water, it was a living chronicle of my life. I learned to swim in its shallows, caught my first fish off the old wooden dock my grandfather built, and even proposed to my late wife under the weeping willow that dipped its branches into the western cove. My small, non-HOA property, inherited and cherished, was my patch of peace in a world that seemed to get louder every year. I'm Mark, a retired land surveyor. My entire career was spent understanding the earth beneath our feet, not in a poetic sense, but in a legal, mathematical, and deeply practical one. I speak the language of metes and bounds, of easements and riparian rights. It's a quiet skill, one most people find profoundly boring. But it's my skill, and I never imagined I'd need to weaponize it just to keep the one thing I loved. That all changed with the arrival of Gerald Sterling and his reign as the new president of the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association. Gerald was a recently retired wealth manager, a man whose personality was a noxious blend of unearned confidence and a desperate need to wield power over something, anything, now that he no longer had the stock market. His domain became our peaceful community. The first sign of trouble was a crisp, cream-colored envelope in my mailbox. The letter, dripping with passive-aggressive legalese, informed me that the HOA board had conducted a review of decades-old access agreements. They had reinterpreted a clause in an original easement. Effective immediately, my property's lifelong, deeded access to the lake was revoked. My dock, the one my grandfather hammered together with sweat and love, was now an unauthorized structure encroaching on HOA common property. I was to cease and desist all access and would be fined for trespassing if I set foot on the path my family had walked for over 70 years. What Gerald Sterling and his board of nodding sycophants didn't know, in their infinite arrogance, was that attacking my lake access via document review was like challenging a master chef to a craft dinner cook-off. They thought they were closing a loophole. They had no idea they were kicking open the door to a library they didn't even know existed, and I was the head librarian. Have you ever had someone with a little bit of power try to ruin something you hold dear? Not for any good reason, but simply because they could? It's a special kind of infuriating, a violation that goes beyond rules and regulations. This story is for anyone who has ever felt that sting. It's not just a tale of revenge. It's a detailed blueprint of how quiet knowledge, patiently applied, could dismantle a bully's kingdom from the foundations up. I tried the reasonable approach first. I truly did. I believed that common sense and documented history would prevail. I gathered my files. The original deed from my grandfather's purchase in the 1940s, the notarized easement agreement from the 1970s when a Lakeview Estates developer first broke ground, and decades of tax records showing my family had paid for the upkeep of that small path. I attended the next HOA meeting, held in a stuffy, beige community center that smelled faintly of stale coffee and self-importance. I waited my turn, stood before the board, and calmly laid out my case. I spoke of history, of legal precedent, of neighborly decency. Gerald Sterling watched me with the bored, reptilian stillness of a lizard waiting for a fly to shut up. When I finished, he didn't even look at my documents. He simply steepled his fingers, leaned into his microphone, and said, "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Peterson. However, as stated in our letter, the board's legal counsel has reviewed the matter. The interpretation stands. The path into Shoreline it leads to our common property. Your access is revoked." A murmur of assent went through his board members. They were puppets, basking in the reflected glow of his petty authority. "But it's not a matter of interpretation," I countered, keeping my voice steady. "It's a matter of recorded legal fact. This document—" He cut me off. "The board has made its decision. We will not be debating it further. Next on the agenda, a proposal for mandatory, uniform mailbox color. Tuscan bronze has been suggested." I was dismissed, not just from the podium, but as a person with a legitimate history and rights. The humiliation was a hot coal in my chest. 2 days later, the escalation became tangible. A heavy-duty chain, secured with a thick padlock, was strung between two newly installed steel posts, blocking the path. Attached to it was a stark, professionally printed sign. Private property of Lakeview Estates, HOA. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. To add a personal flourish of cruelty, Gerald and his wife made a show of cruising the lake in their pontoon boat that weekend. He made a point of slowing down just offshore from my property, raising his glass in a mock toast as he looked at the new barrier, then at my house, a smug grin plastered on his face. He even sent me a formal warning, a fine for $200 for the continued existence of my unauthorized dock. That was the moment the switch flipped. The frustration and hurt cooled into something hard and crystalline. Resolve. That night, I didn't sleep. I went to my home office, a room filled with drafting tables, survey maps, and filing cabinets of property records. I powered up my large format scanner and my high-resolution monitors. The war had been declared, and I was now moving to my preferred battlefield. I began to pull every public record I could find on Lakeview Estates and the surrounding county land. Deeds, plat maps, tax assessments, zoning codes, soil surveys, historical archives, and most critically, the full unredacted corporate charter and bylaws of the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association since its inception. My mission was no longer about regaining access to a single path. My mission was to understand every square inch of the terrain, legal and physical, that Gerald Sterling believed he commanded. I cross-referenced county tax maps with the HOA's own internal plot plans. I spent hours tracing the convoluted history of every single parcel of land that touched the water of Serenity Lake. And late on the third night of this obsessive deep dive, surrounded by a fortress of paper and glowing screens, I found it. It wasn't one thing. It was a cascade of beautiful, fatal oversights. The first was that the HOA only held direct title to the lots the houses were built on and a few manicured common areas, the park, the community boat ramp, the clubhouse. They didn't own the shoreline. The original developer, in a move of either genius or laziness, had never formally ceded the riparian rights of the undeveloped parcels to the association. The HOA's power was an illusion, a widely accepted assumption. They were gatekeepers to a kingdom they didn't actually own. The second discovery was even better. I found a list of all the undeveloped lots bordering the lake. Many were owned by out-of-state trusts, forgotten in family estates, or held by elderly individuals who likely had no idea of the escalating tyranny of the new board president. They were dormant, neglected, and to a man like me, exquisitely vulnerable. The war wasn't going to be fought at a podium. It was going to be fought on the open market. My strategy began to form, elegant in its simplicity and audacious in its scope. I wasn't going to sue the HOA. A lawsuit would be long, expensive, and would only serve to entrench both sides. Fighting Gerald Sterling on his terms, in the arena of board meetings and angry letters, was a losing proposition. He thrived on that kind of conflict. It fed his ego. My plan was to make him and his entire power structure irrelevant. I was going to buy the lake. More precisely, I was going to purchase a controlling interest in the one thing that truly mattered, the shoreline itself. The first step was to create a wall of anonymity. I spent a week with my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah who I'd worked with on complex land deals for years. She immediately saw the beautiful, brutal logic of my plan. "So, you're not just taking your ball and going home," she'd said with a slow grin. "You're buying the whole playground, the sandbox, and the swing sets, then padlocking the gate. Together, we established 3 separate limited liability companies, or LLCs. Each had a bland, corporate-sounding name that would attract no attention on a county clerk's record. Clearwater Holdings, Lakeside Legacy Group, and my personal favorite, Serenity Shoreline Investments, my retirement savings, a healthy portfolio built over 40 years of prudent living, would be the war chest. I wasn't a billionaire, but I had enough. I knew the real market value of these neglected lots, and I knew most owners would be thrilled to get a fair, all-cash offer that could close in weeks, not months. My approach was surgical. I started with the lowest hanging fruit, the parcels owned by out-of-state trusts. My research had given me the names of the trustees or law firms managing them. My first call was to a firm in Chicago managing a 3-acre, heavily wooded parcel on the northern edge of the lake. The family who owned it hadn't visited in 20 years. To them, it was just a line item on a yearly statement and a property tax bill from a town they couldn't place on a map. I made a clean offer through Clearwater Holdings, LLC, no inspections, no financing contingencies, all cash. They bit so fast I almost felt bad. The deal was closed digitally within 10 days. One parcel down, 24 more to go. I repeated the process, varying which LLC was the purchaser to avoid creating a pattern. A plot owned by an elderly woman in a Florida nursing home. A tangled piece caught in a multi-year probate battle between estranged siblings. An overgrown lot owned by a tech guy in California who bought it on a whim in the dot-com boom and had forgotten about it. Each negotiation was a quiet, precise affair conducted over email and phone calls. While these invisible transactions were taking place, Gerald Sterling was becoming more and more brazen at Lakeview Estates. He was living his best life as a petty dictator. He had successfully pushed through the Tuscan Bronze mailbox mandate. He'd instituted new rules about lawn ornamentation. No gnomes, no pink flamingos. He was fining residents for leaving their garbage cans out for more than 6 hours past pickup. He was drunk on power, completely oblivious to the tectonic shifts happening right under his nose. He saw me once during this period as I was walking the property line of a parcel I had just secretly acquired. I was using my old surveyor's transit, ostensibly just for a hobby. He pulled up in his golf cart, the HOA president logo proudly emblazoned on the side. Still moping, "Peterson," he sneered. "You know, for a land guy, you really didn't understand your own boundaries." The irony was so thick, I could have bottled it. I gave him a slow, thin smile. "Oh, I think I'm starting to get a much clearer picture of the boundaries around here, Gerald." A much clearer picture indeed. He just shook his head and drove off, chuckling to himself, utterly convinced of his victory. He had no idea I wasn't measuring my own land. I was admiring his cage. The acquisitions accelerated. It became a rhythm, a steady drumbeat of emails, calls, and digital signatures. Each closing was another brick in the wall I was building around Serenity Lake. I had a large plat map spread across my drafting table, and with each finalized purchase, I would fill in the parcel with a light green highlighter. Slowly, methodically, the shoreline was turning from a patchwork of colors into a solid band of green. My green. I moved from the out-of-state owners to the undeveloped lots technically within the HOA's jurisdiction. My research had shown that many of these owners were years behind on their HOA dues. They were paying fees on land they never used, and Gerald's recent fee hikes and violation notices were likely piling up. These are my easiest targets. I would contact them through Lakeside Legacy Group, LLC, with an offer that not only paid them for their land, but also settled their outstanding balance with the HOA. To them, I was a godsend, an escape hatch from financial burden they'd been ignoring. They sold without a second thought. All the while, Gerald remained blissfully ignorant. His focus was internal, on consolidating his power within the community. He formed a new architectural review committee, appointing himself chairman, giving him final say on any exterior modification a homeowner wanted to make. He was a man playing checkers with intense concentration, completely unaware that the board itself was being lifted off the table. A minor challenge arose when a rumor started circulating at an HOA barbecue that some big developer was buying up the raw land. Panic fluttered for a day or two. At the next board meeting, a concerned resident brought it up. I got a full report from my one quiet sympathizer on the inside, an older woman named Martha who was disgusted by Gerald's behavior. According to Martha, Gerald had stood at the podium and laughed it off. "Folks, let's be realistic," he'd said with condescending authority. "Most of that land is marshy and unsuitable for building. We have the prime real estate. Our property values are secure. No serious developer would be interested in that swampland. His arrogance was my greatest asset." He couldn't imagine a world where his assumptions were wrong. He saw the world through the narrow lens of manicured lawns and property values, while I saw it through the foundational reality of deeds and legal dominion. The most satisfying purchase was the last one. It was a 5-acre tract of old-growth forest that sat directly adjacent to the HOA's primary common area, the one with the community boat ramp and picnic tables. It was the linchpin. Owning it didn't just add to my shoreline control. It created a physical and legal buffer between the HOA's main amenity and the lake itself. This parcel was owned by a conservation-minded family who had resisted selling for years. I didn't approach them with a bland corporate offer. I wrote them a personal letter. I explained who I was, not a developer, but a lifelong resident who had seen the lake's health decline under mismanagement. I laid out my plan not for development, but for preservation. I promised to place a conservation easement on the property, ensuring it could never be developed. I was offering them a chance to see their legacy protected in perpetuity. We met, we walked the land, and they agreed. They sold it to me for a symbolic dollar amount below market value. The final piece clicked into place. I went back to my map. The green highlighter completed the circle. I now owned, through my LLCs, 96% of the Serenity Lake shoreline. The trap was set. All I needed was the right moment to spring it. The moment presented itself in the form of an invitation, slipped into every Lakeview Estates mailbox. Gerald Sterling, in a move of ultimate self-aggrandizement, was hosting a Community Appreciation Day. The centerpiece of the event was to be the unveiling of a new, monument-style entrance sign for the neighborhood, carved from a single block of granite. It was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at the main common area, right by the boat ramp he had so proudly defended from my presence. This was it, the public stage, the captive audience, the peak of his hubris. This was the moment I had been planning for. I spent the day before preparing, not with anger, but with the cool precision of a surveyor plotting his final coordinates. I had a large, professional-grade plat map printed and mounted on a foam core board, ready for an easel. The map clearly delineated every parcel around the lake. The HOA lots were shaded in a neutral beige. My newly acquired parcels were shaded in a vibrant, impossible-to-miss green. I compiled a thick binder, its cover simply labeled Serenity Lake Shoreline Deeds and Titles. Inside were copies of every deed of sale, every title transfer, and the articles of incorporation for my 3 LLCs. On the day of the event, I dressed not in my usual work pants and boots, but in a crisp blazer and dark slacks. I felt calm, centered. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a correction. I arrived as Gerald was in the middle of his speech. He stood at a portable lectern, the massive, tarp-covered granite sign behind him. The residents, maybe 100 of them, were gathered on the lawn in folding chairs. Gerald was waxing lyrical about his vision for the community, about protecting their investment, about the importance of standards. And by enforcing the rules, we have ensured that the beauty and exclusivity of Serenity Lake remain the sole privilege of the members of this fine community, he declared, his voice booming with sanctimony. He was just about to motion for the tarp to be pulled off the sign when I began walking forward from the back of the crowd, carrying my map on its easel. I didn't run. I walked at a steady, deliberate pace up the center aisle they had created in the grass. Heads turned. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Gerald stopped mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing as he saw me approaching. "Excuse me," he barked into the microphone. "Mr. Peterson, this is a private event for homeowners. You are trespassing." He pointed a finger at me. "I believe I warned you about this." I reached the front, placed my easel down facing the crowd, and turned to him. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, but it carried in the sudden silence. "Actually, Gerald, according to Section 4, Paragraph C of the HOA bylaws, owners of adjacent and contiguous properties have a right to be heard at any official community gathering. And I believe I qualify," Gerald scoffed. "You own one small lot. That hardly makes you." It was time. I turned and addressed the crowd, my voice calm and clear. "My name is Mark Peterson. Many of you know me or know of my family's history here. A few months ago, Mr. Sterling and his board revoked my family's 70-year-old access to this lake." I paused, letting that sink in. He did it based on his interpretation of a document. I decided to do some reading of my own. What I discovered is that the power this board believes it has is an illusion. I tapped the large map on the easel. This map shows every parcel of land around Serenity Lake. The beige lots are your homes. The green lots. I picked up a laser pointer from my pocket and aimed a bright red dot onto the map, slowly tracing the unbroken band of green that encircled the entire lake. The green lots, which constitute 96% of the lake's shoreline, are all now owned by me. A collective gasp went through the crowd. They looked from the map to me, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Gerald stared, his mouth slightly agape, the confident smirk completely gone, replaced by a pallor of confusion. He hadn't processed it yet. He couldn't. I let him have both barrels. You see, Gerald, you made a critical error. You focused on a single path. You were so proud of your little chain and your little sign. But you never bothered to read your own founding charter. The HOA never owned the lake. It never even owned the shoreline. The riparian rights, the legal right to access and use the water, belonged to the owners of the shoreline property. I turned to him, my eyes locking onto his. And as of 8 a.m. yesterday morning, when the deed for the old Miller Conservation Tract was recorded at the county courthouse, that owner is me. The silence that followed was profound. It was the sound of 100 minds simultaneously recalibrating their entire understanding of the place they called home. Gerald Sterling's face cycled through a remarkable spectrum of colors, from pale shock to splotchy red to a deep, apoplectic purple. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. He was a statue of impotent rage. That's impossible, he finally stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak compared to his earlier booming rhetoric. You're lying. You don't have that kind of money. It's amazing what you can afford when you live modestly and don't spend your money on things like granite monuments to your own ego, I said coolly. I walked over to the stunned board secretary, a woman who had always looked at me with disdain, and placed a thick binder in front of her. Here are the publicly recorded deeds for all 34 parcels, filed under my holding companies, Clearwater Holdings LLC, Lakeside Legacy Group, and Serenity Shoreline Investments. All legally registered, all fully funded. You can verify every single transaction at the county clerk's office. I suggest you do. She opened the binder with trembling hands, her eyes wide as she saw the sheer volume of official documents. The residents were on their feet now, murmuring, pointing at the map, looking back and forth between me and their suddenly powerless president. The reality was dawning on them, and with it, the terrifying implications. A man in the front row, one of Gerald's staunchest supporters, finally found his voice. So what does this mean? He asked, his tone laced with a new, unfamiliar anxiety. I turned my attention back to the crowd, my voice ringing with the authority that was now legally mine. It means this, I said, my words clear and deliberate. Mr. Sterling, in his wisdom, put up signs declaring the shoreline private property and warning against trespassing. I've decided to take his advice. Effective immediately, I am exercising my legal rights as the overwhelming majority owner of the shoreline. All permissive access to Serenity Lake from any HOA common property is hereby rescinded. The lake is closed. A wave of panic and anger washed over the crowd. This time, however, it wasn't directed at me. It was aimed squarely at the man on the podium. They turned on him. You did this, Gerald, a woman shouted. Your stupid feud. You cost us the lake. Another man yelled. All this for a pathway? Are you insane? The foundation of Gerald's power, built on the illusion of control and the compliance of his neighbors, crumbled to dust in seconds. He was no longer their leader. He was the author of their ruin. I delivered the final, crushing blow. My fight was never with any of you, I announced, raising my voice to be heard over the growing chaos. It was with the arrogance and petty tyranny of one man. But actions have consequences. Until the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association is fundamentally restructured and Mr. Sterling is removed from any position of authority, my shoreline remains private. The very signs he used to lock me out will now serve to lock all of you in. I picked up my easel and my binder. I gave one last look at Gerald Sterling, a man utterly broken, being swarmed by the very people whose adulation he so desperately craved. His empire was gone. His legacy was this single moment of public humiliation. I turned and walked away, the sounds of his world collapsing behind me. I didn't need to look back. I could already feel the cool, peaceful silence of my sanctuary returning. The aftermath was exactly as I had predicted, swift and brutal. An emergency HOA meeting was called within 48 hours. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. According to Martha, my informant, it was a public execution. Gerald Sterling was forced to resign in disgrace, his name now synonymous with colossal failure. The entire board, tainted by their association with him, was summarily voted out. The community, stripped of its most cherished amenity, had turned on their leadership with a vengeance. For a few weeks, an uneasy quiet settled over the lake. I honor my word. The shoreline remained off-limits. I posted my own signs, professionally printed, legally sound, and respectful in tone, stating that the shoreline was private property undergoing environmental review for preservation purposes. There was no chain, no padlock, just a clear statement of ownership. It was a strange feeling to look out at the vast, empty expanse of water. No pontoon boats, no jet skis, no shouting children. It was silent, more serene than it had been in years, but it was a lonely victory. That was never my goal. About a month after the fateful unveiling, I received a formal request for a meeting from the newly elected HOA board president. Her name was Dr. Eris Thorne, a retired biology professor who had lived by the lake for 20 years. She was reasonable, intelligent, and, most importantly, humbled by the situation. We met not in the stuffy community center, but on my back porch, overlooking the water. There were no lawyers present, just two people who cared about the lake. She began with a simple, sincere apology on behalf of the entire community. She acknowledged the injustice I had suffered and the stunning brilliance of my response. Then she asked the question I was waiting for. Mark, what will it take to fix this? What can we do to reopen the lake to the community? I had spent the past month drafting my terms. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about stewardship. I presented her with a document I had prepared, the Serenity Lake Preservation and Access Accord. It was a comprehensive agreement that would redefine the relationship between the residents and the water. First, my family's property and my private dock will be granted a permanent, ironclad, and legally recorded easement for unrestricted lake access, an easement that no future HOA board could ever question or reinterpret. Second, the HOA would pay to have all of my LLC-owned lands legally surveyed and combined into a single entity, the Serenity Lake Preservation Trust, of which I would be the lifetime, unremovable trustee. Third, a new line item would be added to the HOA budget, the lake preservation fee. This fee, calculated as a percentage of their annual dues, would be paid directly to the trust. These funds would be used exclusively for erosion control, water quality testing, fish stocking, and shoreline maintenance, all managed by me. In essence, they would now be paying me to protect the lake from themselves. Dr. Thorne read the entire document carefully. When she looked up, she was nodding. "This is more than fair, Mark," she said. "It's what we should have been doing all along." The accord was ratified unanimously at the next HOA meeting. My victory was complete. I hadn't just won back my little path. I had secured the future of the entire lake. I had transformed a symbol of community privilege into a legally protected nature preserve, funded by the very organization that tried to cast me out. I sit on my grandfather's dock now, often in the quiet of the early morning. The lake is once again alive with the happy sounds of the community, but it's different. There's a new respect for the water, a new understanding. I never set out to become a real estate king or a neighborhood power broker. I was just a quiet man who loved the lake. But I learned a powerful lesson. When a petty tyrant tries to steal your peace, you can't always win by arguing. Sometimes, you have to rewrite the map. The most enduring power isn't the kind that shouts from a podium. It's the quiet, patient, unassailable power of knowledge. They thought my expertise in land was a dusty, irrelevant relic. They learned the hard way that the man who understands the foundation ultimately controls everything that's built upon it. What's the one skill you have that people consistently underestimate? Think about it. Because in the right situation, that overlooked talent might just be your superpower.